Okay, so I'll be talking about a paper from FACT 2020 called The Values Encoded Machine Learning Research. This is a paper that we actually cited in our recent submission to HCOM, and I didn't really know what this paper was. And I think we cited the preprint, and now the full thing was published at FACT 2022, just a couple of weeks ago, very recently. And I'll be talking about this paper today, and I think it's going to be a very interesting presentation. So, hold on, let me move my camera thing. There we go. Okay, so what this paper does. This paper investigates 100 top publications here measured in citations, across two different spans of years. So that is 2008 to 2009 and 2018 to 2019, so 10 years apart, at top machine learning conferences, namely ICML and NeurIPS, formerly called NIPS in 2008. And it investigates these with respect to the values present in each paper, which you'll see a list of later, so don't worry about this too much for now. And then secondly, the sources of funding and affiliation of the authors of these top 100 papers. So this paper then basically goes into what these values are and why they aren't good and you should have different values and so on and so forth. But we'll do something slightly different this morning. What we will do is we will reverse engineer a successful publication at a top conference, and we will see what it takes to be at the top, which I think is going to be a very interesting journey for all of us. So their contributions, they present a fine-grained annotation scheme to study papers that are published at these conferences and to find out the values that are present in these research papers. As said previously, they apply this to 100 of the most influential, i.e. top-cited works from ICML and NeurIPS in the time spans I mentioned, and they extract value commitments out of them. So basically what they do is they hand label each line for all of these papers, and they say, does this sentence somehow relate to one of our, I think they have 59 categories or something. Yeah, that 59 significant values. And they picked those beforehand, they drew them out of a hat. I don't know, they made those up. And then they go through the paper and they label each sentence and say, hey, does this sentence correspond to the category of fairness? And then they go on to present a quantitative analysis of affiliations and funding sources afterwards. So again, this presentation will also be in two parts. So let's look at the values we just talked about, right? I hope you can see that figure. I know the words are not too big. So the dominant values for the top papers, these are the must-haves, and we'll go into each of these in detail in a minute, are performance, present in 96% of publications they looked at, generalization, building on past work, quantitative evidence, efficiency, and novelty. So if you now direct your attention to the right-hand side of the screen here, you can see in green are basically these like standard values you would expect, I suppose. And then in orange, we have user rights. So things like privacy, user influence, and fairness. And in this purple color, you have ethical principles. So let's say, what do we have? Explicability, justice, that sort of thing. And as you can see, those are definitely towards the bottom of this hierarchy. So what does that tell us? If you want a top paper, focus on performance, generalization. Do not focus on things like fairness and privacy, because as you can see, I mean, they maybe make up 1 to 2% of the top papers. So if you want to give yourself the best shot, I would avoid those. So let's look at the justifications before we dive into these values in detail. How do papers justify how they achieve their internal technical goals? So if we look at kind of how people justify their research and their findings, we can see that 68% of papers do not mention a societal need at all, while 17% stated but don't really justify it. So if you are in the group that really states and goes into why society needs your idea, you're really in the minority and are probably hurting your chances of getting a top publication. And then, do you mention the bad things that could happen due to your research? Are you realistic about these things? I hope you aren't, because 98% of people are not. So if you are, again, really hurting your chances. Nobody wants to read that stuff, apparently. So let's look at the values. The top value, performance. There's a little quote from the paper here, which I thought was very insightful. For some reviewers, obtaining better performance than any other system, a state-of-the-art result, is seen as a noteworthy or even necessary contribution. So again, knowing this, you know you're publishing a paper at a top machine learning conference, you should focus on beating a benchmark, I guess, because that is what reviewers deem necessary. Performance values are consistently and without discussion operationalized as correctness averaged across individual predictions, giving equal weight to each instance. So if you're doing, for example, what I'm doing, which is value-sensitive machine learning, it's not looking too good for you. So maybe you should reconsider. And then another key finding for performance is that data sets are typically pre-established, usually by big tech, large corpora with discrete ground truth labels. Our takeaway from this point, from this value embedded in machine learning, performance over everything. Focus on performance. Second value, generalization. A model is perceived as generalizing when it achieves good performance on a range of samples, data sets, domains, tasks, and so on. But only certain data sets, domains, or applications are valued as indicators of model generalization. So what does that tell us? If you want to have a successful publication, you better use MS Cocoa. If you're not using a big tech sponsored or widely accepted data set, again, your odds of having a successful publication are going downhill. So don't try to get creative. Another one, efficiency. So efficiency is commonly referred to indicate the ability to scale an idea up, not necessarily to save resources. So what does that tell us? Make sure your idea is scalable. Otherwise, people won't care about it. Then the last two of the big five here, we have novelty at 77% of papers and building on past work, 88% of papers. So technical novelty is most highly valued. And even though sometimes introductions point out past limitations, the limitations of past work, just to further empathize how good their own contributions are, they rarely are explicitly critical of past papers in terms of data sets, methods, or goals, and never critical of their own papers. Again, our takeaway from this, make sure you have a novel contribution and sell it well. So I promised you we would reverse engineer something here. So what are your keys to success? So the values that have to be present in your paper: performance over everything, only use mainstream data sets, an idea that cannot be scaled is worthless, no novel contribution, no paper. And don't utter any shortcomings or wax poetically about societal needs, because the reviewers will not appreciate this and the people who cite your work definitely will not. So part two of this. Connections. Are you working at the right organization? This is quite interesting because all of us work at the same organization. So let's dive into where we should be working, perhaps. Maybe we're not all working at the right place. So we all know times are changing. And if you are not affiliated with a corporation, I have bad news for you. We can have a quick look at figure 2 down here from their paper, which shows the affiliation of the authors on these top 100 papers by 3 categories. So one is no corporate affiliation. So you had a nonprofit, a research institute, or university, mainly university. Other corporate affiliations. So those are any company. And then there's big tech, which is not corporate, like it's separate from corporate, is obviously corporate. And big tech, which companies that includes are kind of, Google, Facebook, you get the idea. So we can see in 08, 09, the share of top publications coming out of non-corporate affiliated authors was over 75%, over 3/4 of all publications. Today, that share is down to 45%. Meanwhile, the corporate share has gone down slightly, but as you can see, the big tech share has gone up almost 4 times. So again, looking into the future, you know what team you should be playing on. But I can hear you ask, but what if we also look at funding ties and not just affiliations? And that is a very good question. And to answer that question, I will pull up this amazing figure that they had in their paper. So again, you have results for 08, 09 and 18, 19. And you can see on the y-axis, we have the percent of papers here. On the left-hand side, you can see university as a whole. So that includes all kinds of universities. And you can see that that is on the decline. Then again, that used to be extremely high. So you can see that is not too big of a drop in absolute terms. But when we look to the right of the subcategory of university, we can see elite university is actually going up. So I hope you're at an elite university. Interestingly enough, non-NA, non-North American universities are also increasing. So I guess that's very good for us. We are on the come up, though we do make up a very small percent of the whole pie, about as big as the military. I don't know what that should tell us, but you can think about that in your own time. Agencies, I'm not really too sure what agencies are, but they're going down. Military, roughly constant. Nonprofit going up. I think that's mainly due to like the Allen Institute of AI and OpenAI, which I don't think were very prevalent in 08, 09. So that's really how we can probably explain this. Then looking at tech companies, almost doubling, pretty big. But then we look at big tech, which really makes up most of the tech companies. We can see a little breakdown by company, which again is very interesting because now that we know which team you should be playing on, which exact team should you be playing on? Well, when we look at blue, for example, here, Microsoft, pretty stagnant, has not increased their share of the pie in the past 10 years. I don't know, is that a very promising future? Let's look at red, Google. Google more than doubling their share, now responsible for roughly 25% of all the top publications when we consider affiliation and funding sources. Very interesting. And then we also have some of the other players with small market shares here. We have NVIDIA, Facebook, and Amazon, all roughly equal. Very interesting. So as I said before, Google is king, Microsoft is stagnant, NVIDIA is on par with Amazon and Facebook, which is kind of embarrassing for those two. Apple does not feature in this list as they did not publish research at the time. I do believe they've started publishing research now, so maybe that is kind of a good thing to get into if you are considering it. As you saw, universities are still very present, though if you do not find yourself in the elite pool, I would consider switching employer. Also, I think the most important takeaway for all of us here, it's an Anglo-Saxon world. If you're affiliated with an institution or corporation that is not headquartered in North America, it's basically game over already. So you're better off enjoying the summer weather and a fine bottle of Riesling than toiling away in your office. So at this point, I would say congratulations. Let's all pat ourselves on the back. We made it through this talk. We learned something. Thanks to this amazing insight, you will soon have a 500K year job at Google Research and are changing the world one ICML paper at a time. So thank you very much and well done.